Rachel Reeves, we can put this diplomatically, she is under pressure to explain the, in quotes, fake claims, close quotes, otherwise known as lies, on her curriculum vitae, on her professional CV. Let's talk to political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heale. James, Rachel Reeves is not the first politician to be, shall we say, embellish their background. But this is sort of reaching a bit of a head with her, isn't it? You know, first of all, we're told, she was an economist at the Bank of England for 10 years. Well, it looks like she did that job for 6 years. She said, I was also an economist, and my first job was for the Halifax Bank of Scotland. In fact, her team now admits she wasn't an economist there. She worked in something called retail banking. So I'm sure she wasn't a cashier, but not much more than that, I suspect. By the way, apart from her employment, she said she was a junior chess champion. Let's go through that just for a second. In the under 12s, junior chess championship in Britain, she came 19th. The following year, in the under 13s, she came 29th. And in the under 14s, the year after that, she was 26th. So not really a chess champion. This is getting a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, look, politicians are defined by the metrics by which they choose. Rachel Reeves promised to come in as Shadow Chancellor and then Chancellor on the basis of credibility, that she wouldn't, be able to upset the markets anyway, and that she had a track record on which she could base it. And yet, as we see repeatedly, far from being the kind of boring, snoring politician that one BBC executive described her as back in 2014, we increasingly see that there are many different errors of her CV where it appears she has been, shall we say, economical with the actuality, to use Alan Clark's immortal phrase. It is clearly something that her team are worried about, and it's something I think that obviously has a lot of traction, and it deters from Labour's economic message. They're going to get re-elected in 5 years' time. They need to stop actually embellishing what's going on and start telling the truth about what's happening to the country. Yeah, and of course, the whole narrative about her being, an economist at the Bank of England for 10 years, for a decade, and also being an economist up in, for the Halifax Bank of Scotland, that whole narrative is designed to embellish her credentials, as our Chancellor, as the person in charge of the national economy. I mean, it comes to something these days, the biggest exciting claim that most of our politicians make, isn't it, is that I had a job in the real world once. So this is very much the foundation stone of why she believes she should be in the job that she's in. That's fine. I've got no problem with her being in the job. I don't think she's doing a particularly good job, but she could have been truthful about her background, and it doesn't look as if she was. Yeah, and obviously she chose to be defined by credentialism. She said, look, I'm not going to be a great, exciting politician like Boris Johnson or someone like Churchill or Macmillan, but I will promise stability and be boring and being experienced. And of course, now people are saying, hang on a sec, well, your claims don't stack up. You're someone who promised to be whiter than white. And of course, they made such a big thing, Labour, about being different from the last lot. And of course, grandiose rhetoric is something we do associate with the worst elements of Boris Johnson's government. So I do think that, you want to have a chancellor who's credible, and that means both with the markets and the wider public as well. So it's very difficult, I think, for Labour to have these claims out there. And you see this as well. You got to remember, Kevin, it's not just this about the CV. It's also about the book that came out last year. Labour's Shadow Chancellor made a huge thing at the time about, women who are being rewritten back into history, whose contribution to economics had not been properly recognised. And then it turns out this book, after all, was plagiarised. And of course, that was the very irony of the whole thing, was that, first of all, she couldn't spell their names right. Angela Rayner was spelled with an O rather than an E. And second of all, she was miscrediting their work. So, I mean, all these things for Rachel Reeves, the danger is they become part of a pattern.
Yeah, and, her policies are not exactly going down brilliantly, are they? Tomorrow, there's going to be a big demonstration by angry farmers over the inheritance tax. which does seem very unfair to me. And I thought one of the most significant political stories of the last few days was that her department, the Treasury Department, is at war with DEFRA, which is the sort of agricultural environmental department, because they're trying to say, the Treasury is saying, oh, you know, it doesn't affect that many farmers, 27% maximum, which actually is a pretty big number anyway, isn't it? DEFRA is saying, look, stop telling us to lie. It's 66%. So I'm afraid that Rachel Reeves, with her own life and her political life, is turning out to be something of a spinner extraordinaire.
I mean, this is what is so striking, is that you actually have two government departments for the first time under this Labour government coming out against each other. The DEFRA and Treasury are saying different factors about number of people being affected. The Treasury is suggesting less than a quarter of farms. The DEFRA is actually suggesting it's going to be 2/3 of farms. I mean, that is a huge disparity in what ministers and officials are saying to farmers out there. So again, there's the issue about credibility and all of that. And then, of course, there's also the disagree about sort of expertise and how much are you basing this on. We already know, of course, the common Tory attack line is that no Labour minister on the front bench, certainly in the cabinet, has had any private sector experience. And now it turns out that the experience that they do have is coming under serious attack, because you've got people like, former special advisors criticising the fact that the Chancellor claims to have said she worked at the Bank of England for this number of years, etc., and turns out she didn't. And actually, I think what's so telling is that Rachel Reeves suggested she was a very different politician from most of them. Most politicians work in their 20s, as you know, Kevin, for a few years in private sector experience, maybe at the Bank of England or something like that, and then they go to politics. Well, that's exactly what Rachel Reeves appears to have done with her CV.
Do you think that Rachel, we haven't got long left, James, but do you think that Rachel is suffering from a syndrome that the entire Labour government is suffering from, particularly the more prominent members of it? And that is that, you know, they could get away with these little fibs and these lies, and nobody cares when you're in opposition. Yeah. But now they're in the spotlight. You know, what they say, what they do, what they claim is under the microscope, and they're being found wanting. They're not adapting to the acute difficulties of being in government. They don't seem to understand it's different to being in opposition.
Absolutely, and you see that nowhere better than on America. And Donald Trump's election, I think, has shown up half the cabinet for being critical of him then and now sucking up to him now. And I think that a lot of the things that Labour promised in opposition, be it on China, be it on the economy, be it on credibility, the chickens are coming home to roost, and that's what we're experiencing right now, Kevin.
Perfect, James. Perfect timing, as always. Good to talk to you. James Heale there from The Spectator.